Hi, welcome back to Hey Calli. Tonight's topic is metrics, performance metrics. This video is probably most relevant for in-house counsel, compliance officers, and risk managers. So, keeping track of what we do is especially difficult when you aren't counting beans or making widgets, right? We all know this. The last time many of us did this was when we were early on in our careers and we were employed at law firms or consulting firms where we had to keep track of our time, whether it was on a timesheet or some kind of equivalent app, but we were billing by the minute or by the hour. And that was definitely less than enjoyable for many of us. So we think we're free from that when we go in house, and yet we're asked for key performance indicators or metrics, KPIs. And we struggle, right? Because we're not making widgets, we're not answering calls, from clients, we're not doing all those things that are easily counted. Folks call us up or they send us an email and they want advice on something and we have to do some research, or maybe we know off the top of our head but we're not exactly keeping track of time. It just is inconsistent with the corporate culture most of the time. So how do you deal with KPIs? The first thing is you accept them as a reality of your life, your work life. A lot of colleagues that I've had over the years are resistant to reporting metrics for performance because it's inorganic to them. It's inconsistent with the way we provide guidance or advice, the type of work we do. It just doesn't, it's not an easy fit. Therefore, it must be flawed and we can't do it. That's not the answer. Certainly, I can't speak for every circumstance, but in most environments that I can envision, and I've been doing this for about 30 years, almost 30 years, you've got to produce these. And it's to your benefit to produce them. It's to the benefit of the company if you produce them, right? These roles, legal, compliance, risk management, we are expensive back office. At least that's how others see us. If we're not in-house, then they would go to outside counsel, consultants, etc., outside the company. And that's always an option. It's imperative that we prove our value, not just our value intrinsically, but being in-house, as opposed to them farming it out to service providers, right? We want to keep our jobs. That's a good thing. So we need to play ball. That's the biggest hurdle as I see it. Folks that I've coached over the years and mentored, it's getting past that. Well, that's not for me. That's for operations, or that's for sales, or, that's for service desk, whatever. It's not for me. It is for you. It is for you. You need to be able to prove your value to the company. And I know it's not as easy as if you were counting things, if there were, tangibles more frequently, but you got to do it anyway. So accepting that reality is hurdle number one. So let's say you accept it. Let's say you see the wisdom in the fact that it doesn't need to just make sense to you, right? It needs to make sense to your upline. It needs to make sense to the board. It needs to make sense to anyone who owns equity or has an ownership interest, or a debt interest in your company, right? They are numbers people by and large, and overhead, expense, it needs to work out. And value needs to be shown, and value is shown with key performance indicators. Value over time is shown using these KPIs. And when you understand that, it's a whole lot more than great relationships and, a shoulder to cry on when, there's a crisis internally. You need to prove your value to the company. And that comes down to numbers, inorganic as it may be. So, okay, you've accepted the reality of key performance indicators. That's great, but how do you measure? There are a couple of ways. Um, the the easiest kind of low-hanging fruit, as I see it, is to count what's countable first, right? Find those easy hits. If you have an intake queue, right, especially if you're a small organization compared to your stakeholder groups, you very likely have something reminiscent of a queue or a backlog. And if you don't, you should. You count what's in there and the disposition rate, your throughput. Um, you can count the amount of time it tends to take as opposed to counting minutes actually spent. You could say, well, if it's going to be a document of this size, it's a bespoke contract I have to write as opposed to our standard contract. That typically takes me about 2 hours. So I spent 2 hours on this, and street value of that 2 hours for an attorney with, 26 years of experience is going to be about $2,500 an hour. And if you were to do my hourly rate based on my base comp, it doesn't even come close. So you win. I've saved you X amount of dollars, whatever the delta is. That's a way of doing it. But that feels like cheating a little bit, right? Because you're going back to time. What if that's a difficult thing to do? What if there's an inconsistency from bespoke contract to bespoke contract? Well, there are other options. One that I found particularly valuable is when you intake support requests, you require that the stakeholder submitting the request give an estimated value of the initiative, deal, whatever it is that the support request is related to. For example, if you are asked to research the law on a certain thing, you're happy to do that, but you want to know why. And the answer will, let's say, go to the sale of a particular thing. How much is that thing worth? How much revenue is associated with that sale? Let's say it's $100,000. So your metric will then be, well, but for my contribution to the sale through this research, the sale wouldn't have closed. Therefore, I am indirectly responsible for this $100,000 sale. If you can go a step further and cozy up to FP&A, you can potentially get them to look at a series of these things and come up with a dollar value relative to a dollar of revenue. In other words, every dollar of revenue made by the sales organization that you support costs 4 cents in legal or compliance or risk management. In FP&A, they have, formulas for that sort of thing, provided they have enough data. But that would be the most pristine state for you to be in, where you could actually say, this only costs 4 cents for legal or compliance on each dollar. But if we went to an outside firm, it would have cost 30 cents, whatever it is. The cost of the revenue would be much greater. So consider that as a metric. But the quick and dirty is, hey, but for my contribution, that $100,000 sale would not have been made. Another option is penalties abated or penalties avoided. I love this one. Dealing with regulators. Many of you will find yourselves working in heavily regulated fields, industries, whatever. There are always risks associated with, not being completely square at all times with a statute or a reg or, some administrative opinion. What penalties did you avoid by providing the guidance or advice you did? Quantify it. And although the penalty may not have been imposed, it's still something you can count towards your metrics. I think in this type of dynamic, consistency is important. It's also going to take a little bit more research. You're not just going to want to look, don't forget, at the actual penalties possible under a statute or a reg. You're going to want to look at the reality of how they're imposed. What are the enforcement rates of these regulators? If it's a, potential $1 billion in fines, but they never do that because they're not looking to put you out of business or your type of company out of business. So they typically do like 10 cents on the dollar, something like that. And then you take it a step further and you argue it down a little bit so that you're at a fraction of what the potential penalty was. That's a great metric. How did you avoid that? In terms of settlements, I mean, how many times are there claims that you managed to negotiate down to something that's a lot more reasonable? Count that. And a great resource too is your insurance broker that you work with. How is that metric going to work, not just for you, but to potentially get you better rates into the following year. It's just the gift that keeps on giving with numbers like that. Budget savings on outside counsel and consultants. This is a big one. For those of you who've gone in and built from the ground up, gosh, one of the first things you're asked to do is slash that outside counsel or consultant budget. And it's hard. It's hard, especially if you're the first hire in a risk management department, and if you're an attorney, the work is just sitting there waiting for you, right? And sales is clamoring, hey, if you don't look at this contract next, we're going to miss this, huge deal. It's hundreds of thousands, it's just too big. Pick mine. And, you've only got so much bandwidth, so many hours in a day. Certainly under those circumstances, you could count your throughput very, very easily. But what you're also doing is you're saving the company a ton of money on outside counsel or outside consultant spend. Count that. Absolutely count that. And so, you're able to consider all of these countable things. But it's important too that you have these things captured in a way that allows you to count them, right? So this is where software comes in, folks. There are lots of intake software options. I won't name them because it'll take me forever to cite to them in the notes, but you know what they are. Our friends at Service Desk use them. Our friends in Dev use them. The same types of tools that allow someone to submit a ticket and allows the receiver of the ticket to disposition the ticket. Very often these come with metrics. Very often, although they're not cheap, they are far cheaper than headcount. So striking a balance between software first, headcount second, keeping your eye on the ball. Don't forget to, you can always have the hard conversation with your outside counsel and with your consultant saying, hey, look, this is a direction we're going. I'm building a department here or departments, and I got to slash this budget. What can you do for me on the billing? Instant metrics, instant excellent savings. Huge feather in the cap. Sometimes all you need to do is ask. They don't want to lose your business altogether. And, maybe they haven't been negotiated down before. If not, take advantage of that. Another big win. All right, so let's wrap here. Just a quick recap. Accepting the reality that even though you're not working on things that are easily counted, you must produce key performance indicators. Accept that reality. Have your team, if you have one, accept that reality. And if you're flying solo for the short term, hopefully not the long term, you should want to count every little bit. You've got to prove your value. It's also imperative that the company understand that revenue does not come for free. It comes with a risk management cost. And it's not as simple as your paycheck. There's all the work you're doing that saves them money relative to outside counsel or outside consultant fees. And then there's all the work you're doing to abate penalties, prevent penalties, save them money in settlements, etc. Hopefully, these ideas will put you on a stronger path to KPIs when it feels really foreign to many of us when we first get asked for these things. I've been doing this a while, and so I've gotten quite used to it. But when I was first expected to produce them, it was tough. You're not alone. It's counterintuitive, right? We give advice. We give guidance. We don't like to count minutes. We just want to make it better for our clients or our stakeholders, our business partners. And that is the most important thing. But don't forget to count whenever you can. All right, if you are not a subscriber, please consider subscribing. If you enjoyed the content of this video, please give me a thumbs up. And hey, please consider leaving a comment. I will read it. I will respond. And thank you so much for your time. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.